Welcome back, listeners. Okay, ready to dive into societal collapse.
Let's do it.
Buckle up because we're going to unpack Jared Diamond's Collapse, how societies choose to fail or succeed. And
Yeah.
it's pretty wild.
It's a wild ride for sure. Diamond,
Yes.
kicks things off with this brilliant juxtaposition.
Yeah.
Comparing a thriving dairy farm in Montana, with the ghost of Gardar Farm in Greenland.
Right.
It's meant to, just make you wonder, like, how did a once thriving Norse society just vanish?
It really makes you think, right?
Yeah.
Like, what went wrong? Were they just making terrible decisions, or were they just dealt a bad hand?
Well, that's precisely what Diamond sets out to explore. He argues that societal collapse, which he defines as, a dramatic long-term decline in population and or complexity, isn't just some random event.
Right.
It's a process with identifiable patterns.
And he uses some pretty heavy-hitting examples to make his case right.
Yeah.
The Anasazi, the Maya,
He does.
Easter Island. These are names that send shivers down your spine.
Right off the bat, he dismantles some common myths. Like, were indigenous societies always eco-conscious?
Right.
Not necessarily.
Good point.
Were they inherently inferior and just doomed to fail? Absolutely not. The struggle for sustainable resource management has been a human challenge since, like, the dawn of time.
That's actually a huge takeaway, right? It's not about blaming specific groups. It's about understanding, like, these universal pressures that can push societies towards collapse.
Exactly. And to do that, Diamond introduces a 5-point framework. He examines, environmental damage, climate change, relationships with friendly and hostile neighbors,
Okay.
and crucially, how a society responds to these problems.
Okay, let's break that down a bit.
Yeah.
So environmental damage, I think we can all wrap our heads around that.
Right.
But how much weight does Diamond give to climate change versus, say, bad decisions?
He emphasizes that it's not a simple equation.
Okay.
The same environmental challenge can lead one society to thrive and another to collapse. Take forest management, for example.
Okay.
Highland New Guinea and Japan successfully implemented sustainable practices, whereas deforestation played a major role in the downfall of Easter Island. So the societal response is critical.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not just about the problems themselves, but how societies choose to deal with them.
Right.
And speaking of Easter Island, those giant statues are just begging for an explanation.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Diamond delves into the unique factors that made this monumental obsession possible. It wasn't just about the readily available carving stone Ranuraku tuff.
Right. It was also their isolation, which limited other pursuits. The gentle terrain that made it easier to move resources around, and a food surplus generated by these elite-controlled upland plantations. It's almost like all these pieces fell into place to set the stage for this massive undertaking.
It is quite remarkable how all those elements came together.
Yeah.
But it's the disappearance of the island's giant palm trees that really illustrates the environmental consequences of their obsession. Diamond meticulously lays out the various drivers of this deforestation.
Wait, so it wasn't just about carving the statues?
No.
The trees were also essential for firewood cremation, land clearing, and even canoe building.
Wow.
Plus, there's evidence that the introduction of rats had a devastating impact as they likely consumed the palm nuts, preventing regrowth.
Wow, it's like a domino effect, right? One seemingly small action leading to a cascade of unintended consequences. It's a sobering example of how interconnected our actions in the environment truly are.
It is, and as the island's ecosystem declined,
Yeah.
it had a direct impact on their society.
Sure.
As resources dwindled, the chiefs and priests who had promised prosperity and stability lost their authority.
So what happened? Did the people just give up?
Not exactly. Power shifted to military leaders called Matatoa,
Matatoa.
and the island spiraled into chaos and civil war.
Oh, wow.
People were forced to seek refuge in fortified caves, and the archaeological record is filled with obsidian spear points, a grim testament to the violence that engulfed the island. That's a chilling image.
Yeah.
It really brings home the human cost of societal collapse. It's almost like Diamond is holding up a mirror to humanity and asking, could this happen to us?
He does pose a thought-provoking question. What was going through the mind of the person who felled the last palm tree on Easter Island?
Right.
Were they aware of the consequences? Did they rationalize their actions?
Right.
It forces us to confront the seemingly irrational decisions that societies, even our own, can make in the face of impending disaster.
It's a question that sticks with you, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy to judge in hindsight, but when you're in the midst of it, it must be so hard to see the big picture.
Yeah.
But Diamond doesn't stop there, right? He explores other examples of societies that face similar challenges.
He does. To illustrate the complexity of societal collapse, Diamond shifts our attention to the intertwined fates of three Polynesian societies: Pitcairn, Mangareva, and Henderson Island.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What happened there?
Mangareva was heavily reliant on high-quality stone from Pitcairn, and they had this fascinating trade dynamic where they exchanged volcanic glass adzes and basalt oven stones.
Interesting.
But this seemingly beneficial relationship eventually led to resource depletion and societal collapse on both Pitcairn and Henderson.
So even seemingly positive interactions can have devastating consequences if they're not sustainable in the long run. But what about Henderson Island? What ultimately sealed their fate?
That remains a bit of a mystery.
Mm.
We're left with several possibilities. Isolation-fueled conflict, cannibalism, suicide, or perhaps an environmental disaster. The details are lots of time, but the case serves as a reminder that we don't always have clear-cut answers when it comes to understanding the past. Now let's move from the islands to the desert.
Okay.
Diamond takes us to the American Southwest to examine the Chaco Canyon Anasazi. They were incredibly resourceful, adapting to a challenging environment.
Yeah, it's almost hard to fathom, right?
Uh-huh.
Living in that kind of environment, eking out an existence in such a harsh landscape.
It really speaks to human resilience and ingenuity. What's amazing is how archaeologists have pieced together their story using things like dendrochronology, which is basically studying tree rings,
Right.
and analyzing ancient pack rat middens.
Hold on. Analyzing rat droppings. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, it's actually fascinating. Pack rat middens are like time capsules of environmental data. These little guys collect all sorts of plant material and debris, and it gets preserved in their nests for centuries.
Wow.
By analyzing these middens, scientists can reconstruct past climates and vegetation patterns.
Wow. So it's like having a direct line to the Anasazi world. What have we learned from these techniques?
We've gained incredible insights into their way of life. They had a surprisingly dense population, intricate water management systems, and relied heavily on outlying settlements to support their main hub in Chaco Canyon. But this sophisticated system had a fatal flaw. It was highly susceptible to environmental changes.
So even though they were incredibly adaptable, they couldn't withstand the pressures of a changing climate.
Precisely. It highlights the delicate balance between human societies and their environments. And even the most brilliant adaptations can falter when faced with unforeseen challenges.
Okay, so we've talked about the Anasazi, who were masters of the desert, and the Easter Islanders with their monumental obsession. Who's next on Diamond's list of cautionary tales?
From the desert, we travel to the lush rainforests of Central America. Diamond meticulously dismantles some of the simplistic explanations for the classic Maya collapse.
Yeah, I've always heard it was about deforestation. Is there more to the story?
Much more. Deforestation certainly played a role.
Okay.
It led to soil erosion and
Okay.
reduced rainfall.
Yeah.
But that was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Population growth strained their resources and fueled conflict. There's evidence of chronic warfare over increasingly limited land and water.
So it wasn't just about environmental damage, but also social and political factors.
Exactly. And as if that weren't enough, recurring droughts likely intensified all these existing pressures. It was a perfect storm of environmental, social, and political challenges that ultimately led to their decline.
It sounds like the Maya, much like the Anasazi, were victims of their own success. They created this sophisticated civilization
Right.
that ultimately pushed the limits of its environment.
That's a very insightful observation.
Right.
Their success ultimately sowed the seeds of their downfall.
Okay, so we've explored societies in the desert, on islands, and in the rainforests. Where does Diamond take us next?
We're heading back to a colder climate, to Greenland, where the Vikings attempted to make their mark. Their story is a fascinating blend of triumph and tragedy.
The Vikings, weren't they known for their resilience and adaptability?
They were, and their initial success in Greenland is a testament to that.
Yeah.
They established a complex economy that combined livestock, farming land, and marine hunting and trade. But this intricate system made them highly vulnerable to climate fluctuations.
Wait, so climate change played a role in their collapse too?
It seems so. Climate shifts impacted hay production, which was essential for their livestock, and it also affected their access to hunting grounds.
Right.
Their entire way of life was intricately connected to the environment, and when that environment shifted, their society crumbled.
But here's the thing that always gets me. The Inuit lived in the same challenging environment
Right.
and not only survived, but thrived. What was the difference?
That's the real head scratcher, isn't it? Diamond points to the Inuits' incredible flexibility and resourcefulness.
Hmm.
They had sophisticated hunting methods using tools like kayaks and harpoons, which allowed them to exploit a wider range of resources. They were also much more willing to adapt their strategies to changing conditions.
So it's almost like the Vikings were stuck in their ways while the Inuit were more open to learning and adapting.
That's a very insightful interpretation, and here's another fascinating detail. There's no evidence of any substantial trade between the Norse and Inuit.
Really? That seems odd, considering it could have benefited both groups. What was stopping them?
It likely comes down to cultural factors and deeply ingrained perceptions. The Norse may have seen the Inuit as inferior, while the Inuit likely had their own reasons for maintaining their distance.
It's a reminder that sometimes the biggest obstacles to survival aren't environmental, but societal.
Precisely. Our beliefs, values, and perceptions can have a profound impact on our ability to adapt and overcome challenges.
So we've seen a lot of examples of what not to do. Are there any societies that got it right? Did anyone manage to avoid this cycle of collapse?
Absolutely. Diamond dedicates a significant portion of his book to exploring societies that successfully navigated their environmental challenges. He contrasts bottom-up approaches like those seen in New Guinea and Tikopia with top-down strategies such as those implemented in Tokugawa, Japan.
Okay, so bottom-up versus top-down, what's the difference?
Bottom-up approaches involve community-driven solutions often rooted in traditional ecological knowledge. For example, the Highlanders of New Guinea developed a sophisticated system of silviculture, carefully managing their forests to ensure a sustainable supply of timber and other resources.
This is more about community cooperation and a deep understanding of their environment.
Exactly. And it wasn't just practicality. They incorporated these practices into their cultural beliefs, ensuring they were passed down through generations. It was truly sustainable living woven into the fabric of their society.
That's incredible. What about the other example, Tikopia?
Tikopia is a tiny island in the vast Pacific, yet it managed to support a stable population for centuries through meticulous resource management. They controlled everything, even limiting the pig population to prevent overgrazing.
Wow.
It was a remarkable feat of planning and foresight.
Wow, it sounds like they were masters of living within limits. It makes you wonder what we could learn from them today. But what about the top-down approach? What's the story with Tokugawa, Japan?
Tokugawa, Japan faced a different kind of environmental crisis, one triggered by a period of peace and prosperity. As the population grew and demand for resources increased, they started to experience deforestation and soil erosion.
So it's almost like they were victims of their own success. Sounds familiar.
It does, doesn't it? But their response was drastically different.
Okay.
The powerful shogunate took decisive action implementing strict forest management policies.
Wow.
They promoted wood substitutes and even took steps to control population growth.
Wait, what kind of steps?
They implemented measures like infanticide and encouraged late marriage. It was a drastic approach, but it highlights the lengths they were willing to go to ensure the long-term survival of their society.
Infanticide. That's a tough pill to swallow. It makes you wonder if their methods were truly sustainable, not just environmentally, but ethically as well.
It's certainly a controversial aspect of their approach, and it sparks a debate about the trade-offs involved in pursuing sustainability. Do the ends justify the means? It's a complex question with no easy answers.
It definitely challenges our modern sensibilities, but I guess it also underscores the gravity of the situation they were facing. It was a matter of survival.
Precisely. Diamond's point is that there's no one-size-fits-all solution to environmental challenges. What works in one society might not work in another.
Right.
The key is to understand the specific context and adapt accordingly.
So what does all of this mean for us? I mean, are we headed for collapse?
Diamond's book isn't meant to be a prediction of doom, but rather a wake-up call.
Okay.
He argues that by understanding the factors that have contributed to collapse in the past, we can learn from those mistakes and forge a more sustainable path forward.
That's a more hopeful message than I was expecting. So it's not about inevitability, but about making conscious choices to avoid the pitfalls that have brought down other societies.
Exactly. We have the knowledge and the tools. It's a question of whether we have the will and the wisdom to use them effectively.
It feels like we're at a crossroads, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We have all this knowledge about past collapses, but it's almost paralyzing.
It can be.
Like, where do we even begin to apply these lessons?
I think the first step is recognizing that we're not powerless. Diamond emphasizes that societies often collapse because they fail to acknowledge long-term consequences,
Right.
prioritizing short-term gains instead, and that's a trap we need to avoid.
So we need to think beyond the next quarter, the next election cycle, the next news cycle.
Exactly. We need to ask ourselves, what kind of world are we creating for future generations?
Right.
It's about taking responsibility for our actions and making choices that benefit not just us, but also those who come after us.
That's a powerful shift in perspective.
Mm.
It's not just about saving ourselves, it's about ensuring a viable future for humanity.
Yeah.
But that feels so overwhelming. Like, what can one person, one society even do in the face of such enormous challenges?
Well, Diamond doesn't offer a simple checklist, but he does highlight some key factors that contribute to a society's resilience.
Okay, give me some hope here. What makes a society more likely to survive and thrive?
One crucial element is a willingness to acknowledge and address problems head-on. Societies that are open to self-critique and willing to adapt their strategies are more likely to weather the storms.
So no burying our heads in the sand, no clinging to outdated ideology.
Exactly. We need to be honest with ourselves about the challenges we face and be willing to embrace new ideas and solutions.
Mm-hmm.
Another key factor is a strong sense of community and cooperation.
Mm-hmm.
Societies that can come together in times of crisis are more likely to weather the storms.
That makes sense. We're stronger together than we are alone. It's about recognizing our interconnectedness, right? Both within our own societies and globally.
Precisely. We're all in this together, and our fates are intertwined. Isolationism and self-interest are ultimately self-defeating.
It makes me think about,
Yeah.
the lack of cooperation between the Norse and Inuit in Greenland.
Yeah.
Could that have contributed to their downfall?
It's certainly possible. Perhaps if they had been more willing to share knowledge and resources, both societies might have been more resilient.
Right.
It's a reminder that collaboration and cultural exchange can be powerful tools for survival.
It's almost like we need a global paradigm shift. We need to move from a mindset of competition and scarcity to one of cooperation and abundance.
I think that's a profound insight. We need to recognize that we're not playing a zero-sum game. Our success is not dependent on someone else's failure. In fact, our chances of success are far greater if we work together.
So what's the takeaway here? What's the one thing you want our listener to remember from this deep dive into societal collapse?
I think the most important message is that we have a choice. We can choose to ignore the warning signs and continue down a path of self-destruction, or we can choose to learn from the past, embrace a more sustainable way of living, and create a future where both humanity and the planet can thrive.
It's a daunting challenge, but it's also an incredibly exciting opportunity. It's a chance to reimagine our relationship with the world and with each other.
And it's not about waiting for someone else to fix it.
Right.
It's about each of us taking responsibility and doing what we can, no matter how small it may seem.
So what can our listener do? What's one concrete action they can take after listening to this deep dive?
Well, for starters, I'd recommend diving deeper into Diamond's book, Collapse. It's a thought-provoking and insightful read that can really expand your understanding of these complex issues.
Absolutely. And we'll be sure to include a link in the show notes so you can check it out. But beyond reading the book, what else can our listener do to make a difference?
I think it's about incorporating sustainability into every aspect of your life. Make conscious choices about what you consume, how you travel, how you vote. Support organizations that are working towards a more sustainable future.
It's about aligning your actions with your values, right? Putting your money where your mouth is, so to speak.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of conversation. Talk to your friends, family, colleagues about these issues. Raise awareness, share ideas, and inspire action.
We can all be agents of change, even in our own small ways. It's about making conscious choices, having those difficult conversations, and holding ourselves and our leaders accountable for creating a more sustainable future. Diamond's book might be about societal collapse, but it's also a reminder that we have the power to prevent it. It's a call to action, an invitation to create a world where both humanity and the planet can thrive.
Well said. It's a reminder that we're not just passive passengers on this journey. We're the architects of our own destiny.
And that's a pretty empowering thought, isn't it? So to our listener, we say go forth, be informed, be engaged, and be the change you want to see in the world. If you found this deep dive insightful, be sure to subscribe and share it with your friends. For those who want to explore this topic further, we highly recommend checking out Jared Diamond's Collapse. You can find a link to purchase the book in the show notes. Until next time, keep seeking those shocking truths and keep your mind hungry for knowledge.